Okay, so today we are going to be talking about how we can use equivalent fractions to estimate. So all of today we're going to be talking about how we can use estimation to talk about percents and how we can find equivalent fractions. So example 1 says this graph shows the eye colors among 500 students at a school. And we want to find about how many students have brown eyes and how many have blue eyes. So if we look at this graph here, we know all of this, the whole here, our whole is 500 students. That's how many total we have. So that's our whole. And then we have a bunch of different parts here. We have, it says 23% are blue eyes, 16% have green, 46% have brown, 6% have gray, and 9% have hazel eyes. So first it's asking us to estimate how many have brown eyes. So brown we know has 46%, and we know our whole is 500 students. So what we're trying to estimate is what is 46% of 500, because we have 46% is our part out of our total out of our whole. So our part and our whole there. So using estimation, the first thing we want to do is we want to round or estimate what this 46% could be. And whenever I estimate, I like to use rounding. So for instance, 46%, I like to think, okay, is that closer to 40% or is that closer to 40 or is that closer to 50? And so that's really closer to 50. So I'm going to round it up to 50%. Now, the next thing we can think about is in fraction form, what is 50%? So 50% in fraction form is 1/2. Because if you simplify, if you guys did 50 over 100, you still need to simplify that, you would get down to 1/2. So 50% is 1/2. And then we still have of 500. And now this is where we can kind of use our word of. What operation does of mean? So of, if you guys remember from our previous units, of means to multiply. This is multiplication. So all we have here is 1/2 times 500. So go ahead and calculate this out. You guys can use your calculators or you can do it by yourselves. You shouldn't need a calculator for this, but we are letting you guys use calculators for this topic. So 1/2 times 500 is 250. So what this is saying is that about 250 students have brown eyes. And the reason I'm saying about is because this is just an estimation. This is not, we didn't actually calculate out 46% of 500. We just estimated. So that's why we say about when we estimate, because it's not an exact calculation, it's just an estimation. So about 250 students have brown eyes. All right, let's try another one. So next one says to calculate blue eyes. So blue eyes we know is 23% out of our whole, which is 500. So we're trying to estimate 23% of 500. So 23%, let's round that, and we're going to round down because it's closer to 20%. So we have 20% of 500. 20%, I want you guys to write this in fraction form. So if we have 20 over 100, and then we want to simplify, we could divide both of these by 20. So we would end up with 1/5. So that is our simplified fraction there. So 20% is really 1/5. Of we know means to multiply. So we have 1/5 times 500. So go ahead and calculate that out. 1/5 times 500, which is 100. So we can say that about 100 students have blue eyes. Again, that's just an estimation, so that's why we're using this term about. All right, so why don't you guys go ahead and try this one. Suppose the graph shows eye colors among 120 students in 6th grade. So now we have 120 students in 6th grade. About how many 6th grade students would have green eyes? So up here it says green, we have 16%. So, and our new whole is saying just 6th grade, because before we were talking about all of the students at the school, now we're just talking about 6th grade. So we're saying that we have 16% is our part there, our green eyes. And then we have our whole of 120 students. So go ahead and estimate this. If we were to estimate about how many students, 6th grade students, would have green eyes. So if we were to estimate this, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to round 16%. So we're going to round this up. It's closer to 20%. So we have 20% of 120. We can turn 20% into a fraction. So you have 20 over 100, which we already did up above on our second part of our example up there. So we already know that this is 1/5. We know of means to multiply. So we have 1/5 of 120. So we can say that about 24 students, 24 6th grade students have green eyes. So about 24. All right, let's go to our last example. So example 2 says, use the results of the survey shown to the right about how many high school students plan to get a summer job. So we have all of our summer jobs up here, and it says 53% of 94 students surveyed plan to get a summer job. Okay, and we're going to do this in 2 ways. I'm going to show you guys a new way after we practice the way that we've been doing it. So I want you guys to go ahead and estimate. So we have 53% as our part, and then our whole is our 94 students. So I want you guys to go ahead and estimate this about how many students are going to plan to get a summer job. So 53% is closer to 50, so we're going to round down to 50%. We know that 50% in fraction form is really 1/2. We know that of means to multiply, so we have 1/2 of 94. So when we multiply by 1/2, we're really dividing by 2. So we have 1/2 times 94, or just 94 divided by 2. So we end up with 47. So about 47 students are getting a summer job. Okay, the second way I wanted to show you guys is by turning our 53% into a decimal. There's really 2 ways that you can do this. You can do this the way we've been doing it estimation-wise with fractions, or you can turn it into decimal. So we're still going to estimate here. We're still going to round down to 50%. But instead of turning 50% into a fraction, we're going to turn it into a decimal. So if you guys remember in our previous video, I talked about how if you have a decimal, if you say you have 0.24, if you wanted to turn that into a percent, you multiply by 100, which really means that you move your decimal place over twice because there are 2 zeros there. So when you're trying to turn a percent into a decimal, go the opposite way, you go backwards. You would divide by 100 or move the decimal to the left 2 places. So let's try that. So if we have 50%, put this in your calculator, do 50 divided by 100. You get 0.5. The other way that you can look at that is if you have 50% here, your decimal is really invisible. It's really right here, right? Because think about if you had $50, it would be 50.00, right? So your decimal isn't there. It's kind of like an invisible decimal because we don't need it. But this is really where our decimal is. So if you know when you're going from percent to decimal, you have to move it to the left 2 times. 1, 2. Now you have 0.50 or just 0.5. So either or. So you can always divide by 100. Or if it makes more sense to move the decimal place over. But if you do 50 divided by 100, you get 0.5. So we have 0.5. We still have of, which means to multiply, and 94. And go ahead and put this in your calculators. Do 0.5 times 94. And you get the same thing, 47. So there is 2 ways that you can do it. You can estimate, you can use fractions, or you can estimate and turn it into a decimal by dividing that percent by 100 or moving the decimal place over twice.